Let me tell you about the day I got my butt kicked. Actually, I got my butt kicked more than once that day. It was at my first Dog Brothers gathering of the pack. And one of the things I remember most about the days leading up to it was how nerve-wracking it was just finding people to fight. I can be a little antisocial sometimes. I competed before, I'd fought before, I was in great shape, I knew how to use the weapons, but this was different. This was a gathering. I was gonna fight in front of my instructor, Mark Crafty Dog Denny, in front of a crowd and surrounded by all these really skilled fighters. And apparently my nervous system knew the difference. My first fight was with this guy named Miguel. I actually walked up to him while he was sitting down, so I didn't realize just how tall he was until he stood up. I asked if he wanted to fight, and he said, I usually like to do double knife. And I thought, okay, I can do that. So we agreed. Miguel would eventually become Quiet Dog and one of my favorite people in the Dog Brothers. He was also one of the early mentors who helped me as I became more involved with the tribe. But I didn't know any of that yet. At that moment, he was just this very tall guy I had just asked to knife fight. So anyway, we're standing in line waiting to go. My heart rate is probably through the roof, and Miguel looks down at me, and just says one word, breathe. And that's it. And I realized I wasn't, so I breathed. We walked onto the mat. I think Crafty said go. I don't remember that part. What I do remember is that almost immediately I landed a shot on Miguel's fencing mask. And I probably had about half a second to feel good about that, because then he oblique kicked me right above the knee. And the next thing I remember, I'm buried under this enormous human being getting stabbed with a metal training knife, and Crafty's yelling time. That was my introduction to the Dog Brothers gathering. Great start, right? Anyway, the fight that probably taught me even more came later that day. Another new fighter named Eric and I were introduced to each other and decided to do a double stick fight. Eric, if you ever see this, I still love you, brother. And I remember thinking, this is awesome. The fight was actually going pretty well. Then, somehow there was this little lull. Maybe I veered off, maybe Eric did, I honestly don't remember. But suddenly I could hear Crafty talking to the crowd. He said something about how the two of us were using sticks that were a little larger or heavier than what people normally fought with. And for some reason, I looked down at my stick. And I actually remember thinking, oh yeah, these are a little thicker than normal. And somewhere in that moment, I left the fight. I was physically still standing there, but mentally I was somewhere else, looking at my stick and thinking about what Crafty had just said. I froze. And then it was almost like slow motion. I look up and saw Eric's stick whistling towards my head. I moved. But that was the moment the fight started going bad for me. Eventually we clinched. I went for a hip throw. Eric stabbed me in the back with his aluminum trainer. And I walked away from that fight with my thumb broken lengthwise and a major concussion. Not my finest performance. But here's why I still tell these stories years later. Because I learned more that day than how much getting hit with a stick hurts. I learned something about adrenaline. Doesn't hurt that bad. I learned something about fighting. I learned something about coaching and about people. Everyone freezes. I knew how to fight. I competed. I had fought for real life. I knew what was coming. Crafty put a lot of work into getting me ready. I was in great physical condition. None of that made me immune to an adrenal response. We usually hear fight or flight, but human beings can fight. They can flee, freeze, submit, placate, posture. And knowing that intellectually these things happen doesn't mean you're immune to them. I knew better, and I still looked at the damn stick. So one of the things I've become very interested in as an instructor is, how do we break the freeze? And one answer is incredibly simple. I think it was Rory Miller who said it this way first to me, but do something that affects the real world. Breathe, move, speak, put your hands up. Create distance, hit something if you need to, do something. Because once you act, something in the environment changes, and now your brain has new information to process. It's actually one reason I've come to appreciate something as simple as traditional martial arts, the yell. Think about what you're doing. You're breathing, vocalizing, physically acting. You're affecting the world outside your own head. Sometimes the old guys understood things, even if they explained them differently than we would today. There was another lesson from that day that took me longer to fully appreciate. The Dog Brothers talk about being a tribe. That day I got to experience what that actually meant. Even as a new guy on the dance floor, Miguel had just beaten the hell out of me. And over time, he became a mentor and someone I genuinely love and look up to. Eric had just given me a concussion and broken my thumb. No, I'm not bitter. And afterward, I think he was more worried about me than I was. I still have tremendous amount of respect for him, even though it's been a long time since we've seen each other. And another person who had a huge role in preparing me for that gathering, Foo Dog, kept checking on me afterward. He even offered to drive me home. That would have turned into about a 4-hour drive home for him. Not to mention just driving me. Think about that. We were willing to go out there and really fight each other. And when it was over, we took care of each other. That mattered. The real contact mattered. But the willingness to drop some of my own internal walls and step into something where I didn't completely know what was going to happen mattered. And the brotherhood I experienced afterward still matters. This is the tribe that Punong Guru Mark Crafty Dog Denny has cultivated and guiding. Nearly 20 years after beginning training with Crafty, I'm now a guru under him. I'd like to think I've gotten better since that first gathering, but I've never forgotten Miguel telling me to breathe. I've never forgotten looking down at that stick. I've never forgotten what it felt like when my brain just stopped. And I've never forgotten the people who were there afterward. Those lessons changed how I fight, they changed how I train, and they changed how I coach. Good training isn't supposed to convince you that you'll never freeze. You will. Good training should help you recognize it sooner, break it faster, and get back to solving the problem. Everyone freezes. What matters is what you do next.